Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to 90 Day Fiancé latest news. Jamal Menzies, a star of 90 Day Fiancé who is known for being charming and calm, was detained yesterday after a sad event that happened late at night. What started as a night out at a club turned into a terrible accident that left a pedestrian badly hurt and Jamal in handcuffs as police lights flashed through the dark streets of San Diego. That Saturday night, the city was full with music and laughing. People poured out of crowded pubs and clubs and into the streets, where neon lights made the city come alive. Jamal thought it would be a night of fun, a chance to relax with friends after the stress of being in the public eye. People knew Jamal as the bright, smooth-talking son of Kim Menzies from 90 Day Fiancé. He was used to the attention. Bystanders would nod at him, fans would ask for selfies, and bartenders would give him free drinks so they could tell their friends about it later. When he stepped into Club Indigo at 10:30, the mood seemed to shift in his favor. The music was loud, and blue and purple lights cut through the swirl of cigarette smoke. Jamal looked like he belonged in the center of attention. He smiled comfortably, leaned against the bar with confidence, and clinked glasses with companions who were anxious to keep the drinks coming. The first shot of tequila went down without a hitch. The second, then the third. By midnight, his voice was louder across the bar. His sentences were softer at the edges, and his hand movements were less controlled and looser. Friends saw what was going on and tried to help in a gentle way. One friend suggested they slow down, and another friend quietly offered to drive them later. But Jamal didn't care. He was known for being charming. He grinned and waved them away, saying, "I'm fine. I know my limits." It was about 1:45 a.m. outside the club, and the cool night air felt good against his sweaty skin. His friends went with him to the valet, and one of them tried again to get the keys. Later, the attendant would claim that the group had been hesitant and that there was a sense of unease in the air. But Jamal was adamant, brushing off worries and sure he could handle the drive. He had done it before, right? As he got into the driver's seat, the black automobile purred to life and the keys jingled in his grasp. The city was finally shutting down, and the roads were quiet. But to Jamal, the world still pulsed and vibrated with the music and alcohol that were still there. His automobile wandered from lane to lane, with the tires scrapping against the painted lines. He tightened his grasp on the wheel, as if he could control it with his mind alone. His companions in the rear seat told him to slow down, but their voices got lost in the sound of the engine. At 2:05 a.m., everything changed on Harbor Drive. A person came into view ahead, Miguel Santos, a 34-year-old construction worker who was walking home after a late shift. He had been crossing cautiously, looking both ways, and didn't see the automobile coming until it was too late. The tires screeched through the night as Jamal yanked the wheel, but the car swerved wildly and hit hard. Santos's body was catapulted into the air and hit the concrete with a painful thump. The shock and blood filling his mouth made it hard for him to scream. His leg bowed at an odd angle. There was a moment of silence that felt like it stopped time before everything went crazy. A woman yelled. A person with shaking fingers called 911 and recounted what was happening. A man on the ground, a car stopped just ahead, and the driver staggering out in disbelief. As Jamal walked onto the asphalt, his face lost all color, and his knees almost gave out. He kept saying, I didn't see him. There was no denying that his breath smelled like alcohol. He tried to walk toward the hurt man, but his hands shook and he couldn't. It was as if invisible walls were holding him in place. The paramedics were very quickly, with lights flashing and sirens blaring. They worked quickly over Miguel Santos, tying him to a stretcher and stabilizing his mangled body for the urgent sprint to the hospital. His health was quite bad, and his life was in a very fragile state. The police officers focused on Jamal. The questions were crisp and short, and the tone made it clear that there was no space for mistake. They questioned him if he had been drinking and told him to take the field sobriety test. His attempts were awkward, his body swayed, and his steps were off. The test sealed his fate. It showed he had almost twice the legal limit. The cold metal of the handcuffs cut into his skin as they clicked shut around his wrists. People were taking pictures of the spectacle with their phones, and the wind carried their murmurs. Red and blue lights lit up the night. Within hours, his mugshot, which showed his eyes hazy and his face blank, spread like wildfire on social media. A reality celebrity is detained, a tragedy is happening, and a family is being watched by the public. The phone rang for Kim Menzies just after daybreak. The words on the other end were weighty and piercing like glass. Her son had been arrested for drunk driving and hurting a man in an accident. She sat still, unable to breathe, her pulse racing with fear and amazement. Her son, the one she had always stood up for, was in jail while another guy struggled for his life because of him. Kim lost it and started crying uncontrollably. She thought about every memory she had of Jamal. The times he laughed as a youngster, the times he rebelled as a teenager, and the times they were together on screen. Now those pictures clashed with the truth, blazing lights, broken bones, and headlines that screamed his name. She felt broken in ways she couldn't put into words yet. At the same time, Miguel Santos was in the hospital, hooked up to machines and in pain from several broken bones and a crushed leg. His family was there with him. His wife clutched his hand and cried as she whispered to him. Their 2 kids were at home, too little to comprehend why their dad hadn't come back that night. News outlets flooded the area, reporters set up camp outside the police station, and paparazzi searched through Jamal's old images for clues and answers. Former cast members of 90 Day Fiancé flocked to social media to share their thoughts, which ranged from sympathy to anger. Fans argued online for hours, with some saying he was just a young man who made a terrible mistake, and others demanding for him to be held accountable and for the victim to have justice. Jamal sat in the holding cell with his head in his hands, feeling the weight of reality on his shoulders. His lawyer told him what he was being charged with: DUI with injury, dangerous driving, and vehicular assault. Every remark hit like a hammer, and every syllable reminded me that the charm and effortless confidence didn't matter here. There are no edits, applauding lines, or sad music in courtrooms. Nothing but repercussions. Jamal understood that his job was on the line, his reputation was in shambles, and his future was unknown. But what bothered him the most wasn't his personal breakdown. It was the sight of a man laying broken on the sidewalk, his life forever changed because he wouldn't give up his keys. The days that came after seemed to last forever, and were very hard. Kim stayed away from cameras to keep journalists from asking her questions all the time. She didn't sleep much since her mind kept going over the same questions. How had this happened? What clues had she missed? Could she have stopped him? The hospital became a second home for Miguel Santos's family. Every beep of the monitor reminded him how precarious his life still was, and every visit to the doctor filled him with fear and hope. They wanted responsibility, not retribution. They wanted people to know that their anguish was real and would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling. There was still a lot of activity on social media, with hashtags going up and down and opinions coming and going. Fame, which had once protected Jamal, had turned into a curse, making every mistake worse and making sure that his collapse was not private but public, with millions of strangers watching in real time. But even with all the hubbub, the heart of the narrative was still very personal. A young man who thought he couldn't be hurt found out he could. A mother who had made her life all about her son's success was heartbroken. A moment of carelessness had almost ruined a father's walk home from work. The city moved on, as cities usually do, but for the people who were involved that night. The victim in his hospital bed, the family waiting for news, the reality star in jail, and the mother crying alone. The world would never be the same. The night that started with music and laughing ended with sirens and cries, broken bones, and shattered dreams. Jamal Menzies' life used to be full of cameras and fans, but now it's full of flashing police lights and a mugshot that tells a different story. Outside of TV, there are no do-overs. No changes to make it easier. Things happen because of what you do, and for Jamal, the night he lost control of his automobile would always represent the line between who he had been and who he would have to be from then on. The cell door closed with a loud bang that echoed in Jamal's chest. The sound stayed with him, piercing and final, as if it were trapping him inside a nightmare with no way out. For the first time in 27 years, Jamal Menzies lost everything that had made him who he was. His tailored clothing, the smile he always wore for cameras, and the ability to stroll out into the night. He was now sitting on a narrow cot with stale air and harsh light. His wrists were hot from the cuffs that had just come off. He had a headache, partly because the booze was still slowly moving through his veins, and partly because he was in shock. But largely, it was the heaviness of what had happened, the scene that kept repeating over and over in his head. The body of the pedestrian on the sidewalk, the gasps of people who were there, the awful hush right after the crash. Vehicular assault, the officer's voice resonated in his head. Driving under the influence with injury. Reckless driving. Each remark was like a brand on his mind. The jail around him was full of low sounds, like people talking in other cells, boots clanging against concrete floors, and the buzz of a fluorescent light above. Jamal sat still, his thoughts starting to come apart at the seams. He wanted to believe that this was only transitory, and that he would wake up in his own bed with sunlight streaming in through the window. But the truth hit home. This was not a dream. This was the start of his new life. Kim Menzies was at home on the couch in her living room, and her phone kept vibrating. She couldn't make herself answer. Every notification was a new headline, a new Instagram tag, or a communication from someone she didn't know. Your son is a bad person. He should be ashamed. You should be ashamed. Even though every phrase made her chest hurt, she had spent hours browsing. Everyone saw the mugshot. Jamal's pale, lost face peered out from feeds and stories, with captions full of derision and anger. Memes were already going around, making fun of her son's demise in nasty and ruthless ways. Some others used stills from 90 Day Fiancé and put his earlier statements next to stories concerning drunk driving. Some people took screenshots of Kim's sad moments on the broadcast and turned them into jokes that made fun of her. She threw the phone on the table and cried. She knew her son better than anybody else in the world. They didn't notice the boy who used to stay up late to make her laugh when she was sad. They didn't see the young man who stood up for her when others made fun of her on TV. They simply saw the headlines, the scandal, and the mugshot. Her heart shattered not just for Jamal, but also for Miguel Santos, the man who was in the hospital due of her son's actions. Kim silently prayed for his recovery, but she felt guilty with every breath. Could she have put a stop to this? Could she have pushed Jamal more to stay home that night? Miguel's family stayed at his side in the hospital. Elena, his wife, sat beside his bed, holding his hand and saying prayers into the clean air. The machines kept beeping, reminding him that he was still alive, even if it was just barely. Elena's sister was at home with their 2 kids, who were asking her questions she didn't know how to answer. When will Daddy be home? The physicians were careful with what they said. They said he had several fractures, internal bleeding, surgeries ahead, and a long recovery if he lived. Elena's eyes were red and puffy from being tired and sad, but there was also rage behind it all. This wasn't her husband's choice. He had been walking home from work, exhausted but alive, until a stranger's carelessness ruined everything. While in jail, Jamal leaned against the chilly wall and thought about how guilty and scared he was. He thought of his mother and how sad she would be if she were alone and crying. He thought of Miguel Santos and the kids who would lose their dad because of him. He felt sick to his stomach, and it had nothing to do with drinking. The guards walked by his cell and scarcely looked at him. He was just another case to them, another name on a list of charges. Here, being famous didn't matter. Nobody cared about 90 Day Fiancé. No one cared about the image he had worked so hard to create. He was a prisoner here. Outside, Instagram kept sending his name into the digital ether. Influencer pages went into great detail about the arrest with extensive captions. Bloggers put constructed timelines of the night, using rumors and pictures from admirers who had seen him in the club. One caption under a fuzzy picture of Jamal slumped against the bar said, "Sloppy drunk." Could this have been stopped? Former cast members made passive-aggressive comments. Some people showed sympathy, but most people were against it. A few people completely cut ties because they were afraid of being associated with the stain. Fans started using the hashtag #CancelJamalMenzies to ask that he not be allowed to appear on any network again. Some people stated that he should never make money from being famous again. Some people wanted justice in prison. Before the courts ever did, the online jury had made its decision. Kim closed her blinds, cutting out the photographers who had already come to her street. She sat in the dark, shaking and holding a blanket across her shoulders. She felt like she had no power. She couldn't defend her son since he was alone in a cell, and the world was tearing him apart. She knew for the first time in her life that there were fights that even a mother's love couldn't win. In jail, the night arrived slowly. Jamal laid on the flimsy cot, looking up at the ceiling and listening to the muted snores and coughs of other prisoners. He couldn't sleep. He saw the headlights, the person who suddenly appeared in the road, and the crash every time he closed his eyes. He heard the scream again, the sound of metal and bone breaking, then the sound of sirens. He said softly into the dark, "I'm sorry." Only he could hear him. "I'm so sorry." Yet saying sorry didn't fix broken bones. They couldn't make Miguel Santos better. They couldn't change the moment that had already been written into his life story forever. And the storm kept raging outside their fortifications. People on the internet tore him apart. The press was all over Kim. Miguel's family prayed hard at the hospital. The world had moved on from the nightclub and the flashing lights. But for those who were still there, the night was only beginning. The night after his arrest was a jumble of hours that Jamal couldn't count. The lights in the jail never went out, so he was stuck between being tired and awake. He sat on the side of the cot with his elbows on his knees and looked at the concrete floor. Time went by, yet it never felt like it moved forward. There were always sounds in jail: metal doors banging, other convicts whispering, and the occasional shout echoing down the hall. Jamal heard everything, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept hearing the accident, the screams of people who saw it happen, and the way Miguel's corpse crumpled when it hit the ground. It was stuck in his head, going around and around without end. When he thought about Miguel, guilt hit him in waves so strong that they almost knocked the breath out of his chest. He thought about how the man's family was waiting in a hospital waiting room, their lives abruptly torn apart because he chose to drive. Every time the thought came to him, Jamal put his palms on his face and whispered to himself, "Why didn't I let someone else drive? Why didn't I pay attention?" As a guard walked by, the cell bars rattled, and he looked inside with no interest. Jamal looked the man in the eye for a second, but the guard turned aside and kept going. He wasn't a TV star here, and fans didn't want to take pictures with him. He was just another drunk driver who had damaged someone's life. It was darker than normal in Kim's residence. She hadn't opened the blinds since the news broke, because she was scared of what was outside. There were already cameras parked outside, and journalists were waiting for her to say something. Their voices were muted by the closed windows. Every time a car went by, her heart raced because she thought it may be another group of photographers or nosy neighbors who were interested enough to stay. Her phone buzzed on the table, and the screen lit up with Instagram alerts that she didn't want to read. Earlier in the day, she had tried to swipe through the hashtags with shaking fingers, but the comments stuck in her mind. People she didn't know made fun of her tears from the show and turned them into videos with captions about her son's arrest. She always stood up for him, but now look at him. Both the mother and the boy want to be famous, and now they are getting what they want. She hung up the phone because she couldn't stand to stare at it any longer. Nobody knew how much she cared about him. No one knew how many nights she had stayed up thinking about him before this. She wanted to yell at everyone and tell them they didn't get it, but what good would that do? They would merely turn what she said into additional headlines. Kim cuddled up on the couch with a blanket over her shoulders. She felt like her chest was empty. She wanted to go to him and see her son, but she was also afraid of what she may see when she gazed into his eyes. Would he appear embarrassed? Would he look sad? Miguel Santos was very sedated at the hospital because the doctors had put him under after his second surgery. There were cables and tubes all over his body, and machines stood about him like silent guards. Elena, his wife, sat close by with her hand on his arm. Her eyes were puffy from crying for hours. Reporters had also tried to call her and offered her money for interviews, but she didn't answer. What could she possibly say? That her spouse had gone to work one night and might never walk again? That their kids were asking when their dad will be home and she didn't know? The family's lawyer told them to keep silent and focus on Miguel's rehabilitation. But Elena wasn't quiet on purpose. She was too tired and in too much pain to talk. Jamal worried about his mother as he was in his cell. He pictured her at home with the curtains shut, her heart breaking because of what he had done. He thought about how much she had always cared about everything he did, as when she cried for him on TV. The notion of hurting her this much made his stomach turn and made him feel terrible. He had a guest request, but no one had come yet. He didn't hold it against her. She might not have been able to face him. Maybe she couldn't stand to see how he had changed. His lawyer finally showed up late in the afternoon, looking sharp in a suit and with an unreadable countenance. People met behind thick glass and held their phones to their ears. The lawyer stated calmly, "Jamal, this is serious. You have more than one charge against you. Driving under the influence with injury, reckless driving, and vehicular assault. The prosecution is going to use you as an example." Jamal swallowed hard. "What will happen to me?" The lawyer said, "That depends. You are young, this is your first crime, and if you show remorse, we might be able to work out a lighter sentence. But don't think for a second that you won't have to deal with the repercussions, Jamal. There is a lot of pressure from the public. The media is ripping you apart." Jamal nodded without thinking. He already knew. He didn't need the lawyer to tell him what people thought of him. Every comment, every headline, and every meme that made fun of them was proof. Kim sat at home looking at a picture of Jamal as a child, with a big smile on his face. She remembers that day well. It was his first day of school, and his rucksack was too big for him. She kissed him on the forehead and told him he could accomplish anything and be anything. At the time, she had believed it. She still wanted to believe it now. But suddenly her son was no longer a child with infinite options. The world wanted him to be punished because he was in jail. She knew that no matter what occurred in court, things would never be the same again. The harm had already been done to Miguel, Jamal, and herself. The storm got louder on Instagram. Pages with millions of followers picked apart the accident like it was a show, feeding off the tragedy like it was another episode. Fans talked about the penalty and whether or not he should be forgiven. Some people asked for sympathy. He made a mistake, but that's normal. Some people were cruel. Get rid of the key. He messed up a man's life, so he should have to pay for it. And throughout it all, Jamal's face kept coming back. He was no longer the pleasant young man fans used to love. He was now the poster boy for bad decisions. That night, Jamal lay awake in his cage, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't get away from the noise outside or the racket in his own head. Now, every mistake seemed bigger, and every decision had brought him to this freezing mattress in a chamber that smelled like sweat and sorrow. He whispered into the void, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Mom. Sorry, Miguel." But no one listened, and the world outside continued going, louder and rougher than it had ever been. This gossip is over. If you liked the video, then give your opinion in the comment box and stay with us by subscribing the channel. Thank you.